So we'll change gear a little bit, not talking about the anatomy or physiology, but rather talk a little bit loosely about how to optimize localization of the sound source. See, we live in the visual world. We are so used to, whenever we look for an object, there's a line of sight. So the tree is in our eye, and immediately it is perceived as part of the visual world. But it's so different when it comes to hearing, because you make an indirect mapping because you need to compute where is the sound source. And because you should note that pressure, sound pressure at the eardrums, it's a scalar quantity. It's not a vectorial quantity. So you have to do something else. So if we have a singing bird here and a listening bird here, you get variations in sound pressure at the two ears as a function of time. And from that, you compute the location of the singer. And that may be different from the real one. But then, of course, you have your eyes to instruct your ears of where the position is. However, if now you are in a bird and you are up in the canopy, you can't see it really. So there'll be a zone of ambiguity around the sound source. And the question is, how big is that, and what causes it, and what can you do to optimize it? So this naive view is that it may be that your computation is accurate, but that the cues used for computation are inaccurate, or that you simply don't calculate right. So let's start with, we are good at locating, it's only the cues that may be different. So we may see, or we may estimate an azimuth direction, and azimuth, of course, is horizontal direction to a source with elevations in this. And the strange names comes from the Arabs who studied astronomy and gave us all those words. So this could come from barriers, reflectors, or velocity gradients. Or computation could be difficult because of multiple scattering and a lot of other things. So, for instance, if you have a singer, a listener, sound barrier, but then some reflecting objects out here, you might calculate that the singers are located up there. And if you're out in the forest, you have you have the speaker here and you have the microphone here. Of course, there's always the direct sound, but then there are reflectors. The ground is always there. Ground is always reflecting and interacting, and nearby objects may also be reflecting. And now, if you look directly on an oscilloscope, send out a very brief pulse, look at an oscilloscope, you can see that this was the direct wave that came first, and then there was the tree trunk, and then there was the ground. So it's, and a little bit of something else, but there are some objects close by that could disturb calculations. Yeah. Just one quickly through this, and then just say that, see, it's me here, my height. So when you are up at, say, about 4 meters and above, and the ground is very soft, you have no reflections from the ground really, and the direct wave is the one that can be used for calculations. But then there are all these phenomena in the air. For instance, if there is a temperature gradient, then sound will be bent away from the highest temperatures, or in the evening, of course, they'll be bent back. All that is, I talked about that in Tukusa, and some of you will know about that. And of course, there can also be wind gradients that really will make a difference. So that makes the sound seem to come from somewhere else because it has been bent away because of these phenomena. Cues can also be degraded. For instance, if you take a pulse like this, send it through some vegetation and record it just a few meters away, you see a sound that is attenuated 10 times or 20 dB, and it's not just the primary sound that you send out, but lots and lots of echoes, such a trailing tail. So that may interfere also with your calculations. So all these we call habitat-induced degradation. Turbulence, didn't talk about that, but that's just when the wind comes and make vortices. Variation in temperature, multiple scattering. So what we need is some measurements of how much does it really. This is theoretical, of course. How much do we really know about such degrading entities, and also we need to know how does location change, location precision change when the environment gets thicker and thicker and thicker. That really hasn't been done. There's another possibility. If a female bird is roosting in a nest hole, then she'll be able to listen to the male song if he's just outside the hole, but it will be very difficult to say anything about other locations.
Ole,
yeah?
Have we ever explained what ID and ITB is?
No, I'll come to that.
Okay, cool.
So, computation in that goes into all time difference, ITD. So if sound comes from here, it'll hit this ear first and then that ear. So there'll be a time difference. Since my ears are 17 centimeters apart, you can calculate yourself with sound velocity 340 meters per second, how much that is. Something like 600 microseconds. And then there are the interaural intensity differences. So that is the difference in sound pressure levels at the two ears. But then the problem is, as Jakob already mentioned, that bird heads are very small, 1-2 centimeters for many birds. So it's difficult for them to generate large time differences, large intensity differences. So the question is what else we can do. This, for instance, is a bird song, which we can't hear, but it's a European blackbird. So it could use abrupt changes in amplitude. That would give a time marker to the two ears, or it could be abrupt changes in frequency.
I can do it.
Something like that.
Not this song, but like it.
And you can also have, so these are abrupt changes, that is sort of time markers, but you also have ongoing phase differences. If you have a sort of a longer tone, as you see it here. So, if you now try to look into, if it was to use interaural time differences, then head widths, they are some, say, 10 millimeters for a zebrafinch and 35 millimeters for a crow. whereas, as I said, our head has a time difference, or a size of 17 centimeters normally. So we'll be able to use, if we are able to resolve 10 microseconds, 10 millions of seconds with our head, then we'll be able to resolve direction differences of about one degree, whereas a bird with its head would be inaccurate by about 10 degrees. The best accuracy, of course, would be if you got the sound arriving at one ear first and the other. So that's in this position where you get the maximum interval time difference. But if you are in between these here, then you get smaller and smaller time difference. And the question is how close you can come before you really can't distinguish between these two positions. So for a small bird, when it comes to interval time differences, it would be something like 10 degrees. But the further away the other bird is, the bigger problem you get into. For instance, at 50 meters, your potential error would be 9 meters. So you can fly in the direction you think, but then you really have to look. So there are other ways of doing this also. And that's the interval intensity differences. So at low frequencies, here we have the singer, here we have the listener, and the listener has sort of optimized its intensity difference. But if the wavelengths, as we saw, is much bigger than the head, then there are no differences whatsoever. You can imagine that you have a small boat in the ocean and the surf is coming in and you see nothing. There's a surf, the waves just pass the boat. But then if you have a big tanker, whatever it's called in English, lying in the same place, there would be a quiet zone behind it. And there would be splash on the exposed side. So it's sort of the same thing we get here. If now the wavelengths are becoming smaller than the head, then the ipsilateral ear, which is the ear that is exposed to the singer, will have they'll have an additional perceived intensity of 1 to 4 dB at the most, whereas the contralateral ear over here will have what is referred to as a shadow zone. And you should just remember this, because that's what we actually see when we try and measure. But so you can see we may get up to perhaps up to 14 dB difference, but it is very complicated. This is absolutely black and white. So we have both in humans and in birds what is referred to as the duplex theory, that you use in all time differences up to about 3 kilohertz, because the auditory nerve is able to phase lock up to about that frequency. And then the interval time differences, they may work at higher frequencies. And this is, of course, what we get at the opening of the interval canal. The question is, can birds now enhance these cues in some way to make computations more accurate? And that's where the so-called interoral canal comes into play. Because already Schwarzkopf, those 73 years ago, found that there is a connection between the middle ears, such that in principle sound can come from here affect this eardrum and travel through here and then affect that eardrum, and a bit later the opposite will take place. And that interaction may have some advantages. So if we now have, this is the bird cranium, this is an indication of such an inaural pathway. This is the direction of sound waves. Now we take this out and enlarge it. So first hitting the left eardrum, passing through the inaural pathway, then the other finally catching up and reaching that one, and all the way back here. And you can see the time difference between sound hitting this eardrum and that eardrum will depend on the direction. So you go up here, if it's here, they hit at the same time. So now when we then have a bird in a setup, we measure the vibrations of its eardrums with a laser Doppler micrometer, and we have a probe microphone to measure the sound pressure at the ear opening. We then take our sound source, that is a speaker, around the bird here and see how the eardrum responds to stimulation. And do this at different frequencies. And you can see the red one is the probe microphone. The black curve is the response of the eardrum. So, for instance, here at 270 degrees, that is exactly on the opposite side of the head, the vibrations amplitude is in the forward direction. It was at 0 dB, and here it is almost at -60 dB. So the vibration amplitude gets much lower, whereas if the sound is coming from over here, it is much higher. And you can see that here the microphone directionality, we refer to such a diagram as directionality. There is in the microphone a little bit of directionality, that is difference in different directions. But when you come between 2, 3 and 4 kilohertz, it's much, much higher. So, and that's in an intact bird where sound is able to pass. And for that to happen in an anesthetic bird, you need to punch a hole somewhere, because else we will run into other problems. And to make sure that there isn't something else happening, you can do this, that we simply pull out the right eardrum and do the same thing again. And you can see here, 1 kilohertz, much the same, 2 kilohertz, some directionality, 4, much more, but when we get to 8 kilohertz, it isn't directional. There's no difference between between the microphone and the vibration amplitude. So this, in this bird, which is a Jerica, there is directional information between 2 and 4, 6 kilohertz perhaps, because of the inaural canal. Yeah. Problem is, of course, that we here it's sort of the same thing, but we do it at just one frequency, and this is from another bird. You see, again, there's that the vibration amplitude is much reduced in the contralateral ear as it is in the ipsilateral ear, and such that the difference between what one ear sees and the other ear sees is pretty big. when it comes to interval time differences, or interval intensity differences. So, as a function of frequency, here we see how much directionality we get by diffraction. That is simply what happens to the sound at the ears. That's a physical phenomenon, diffraction, that builds up with frequency. But it is extended by this interval canal, or internally coupled ears, that is called nowadays. So when you now go to that was interval intensity differences. If we go to interval time differences, there's also an amplification because of this. So the physical distance of the head is about 10 millimeters. However, this is not a tube like this. It's actually bending, such that in reality it's much longer than depicted here. So you can now start to calculate how much directionality there would be from some complicated physical models, and you would get this directionality, which is a few 80 microseconds at the most. Whereas if you then look at low frequencies, this is a bird, noisy miner from Australia, you can see that there is an enhancement of the time difference. So the interval canal at low frequencies can enhance by a factor of 3 with the time difference, whereas at middle frequencies it only enhances with a factor of 1.3. Then, so it might be a good idea to have such an interval canal, but having an interval canal does not mean that you have enhancement. For instance, you can see we made some model work, and only when transmission delay and amplitude of transmission is within a certain range, like these B, C, and D, you'll get some information, some directionality. For instance, in the Barnau that Jakob and I worked on, and where Castle is the world champion, it has where this canal is the narrowest. It has a diameter of 3 millimeters, which is quite big actually. But there's only transmission, there's only interaction, there's only enhancement of interval time delays between 1.5 and 3.5 kilohertz. And that's where it has its interspecific calls and possibility of interspecific communication. Whereas when it's out hunting, it's using the frequencies between 4 and 8 kilohertz. And this canal is absolutely non-functional. However, then they have this facial rough, as I talked about, and they are able to, in absolute darkness, to work to catch mice within a few centimeters. Yeah, so we'll skip this and that. Yeah, it's some of the same. When you make when you measure accuracy, in the lab, you get quite big. You need quite big, quite big angles to distinguish whether it was this speaker or that speaker that was on. But in the field, birds are actually able to be much more precise than And that may have to do with their behavior. There have been some very nice studies 20 years ago, but I don't think that anybody ever followed it up, where birds will, when they sit and decide where to go, they'll always have their beak about 45 degrees relative to the direction. And at 45 degrees, that's where we had that's where we had the maximum difference. Oh, yeah. So, very quickly here. So, when they are out in the field and you have echoes from different obstacles, will that interfere with their hearing, with their directionality? And then it turns out that budgerigars and other birds, they have the so-called precedence effect, or precedence of the first wave. So if you play two sounds, two very short sounds, with difference of up to 500 microseconds, this bird will calculate that the sound source is sort of in between the two. Now, if the interval between the two is between 0.5 and 5 milliseconds here, then they'll sort of suppress this second one. So in this situation, they'll say, okay, the sound came from the left because this was where it was. So this echo suppression is something that goes on in the central nervous system. Whereas if we come to more than 5 milliseconds, then they'll hear first one sound and then another sound. And the question is, can this be used in the field? And you can see that if we have a sender and a receiver, and we have a direct wave, then 5 milliseconds, that corresponds to a path distance difference of 1.7 meters. Then you can see that within such an ellipse like this one, there'll be suppression of echoes. Whereas if they are out here, they'll not be suppressed. But then, of course, the inverse distance law means that they'll be not as they'll be softer than the direct ones. Yeah, I'm almost there. Mm-hmm. So cues may be inaccurate and ambiguous, but so we need to do more measurements, and I don't think that people really have done that. And birds do have efficient tools, so such as the precedence effect and the indoor canal. But there's one big question we don't know about, and that is how much difference do they really need out in the field? Because some years ago, one of our colleagues, Heiner Römer from Austria, using a biological microphone, which was an electrode directly into the hearing organ of a grasshopper, could take this grasshopper out in the field and could see how easily sounds degraded. And most surprisingly, the sounds or the information that degraded the least was time information, whereas all amplitude it degraded. But it was able, because of the time differences, to locate. And something similar may happen in birds, we just don't know.
Okay. Ole, you can take some questions while I'm sitting gapping up.
Yeah. Questions? Then I could say something fun to a bioacoustician. That many years ago there was this debate whether the all canal worked its all. And we made measurements and found out that there was no difference in directionality between what we measure at the eardrum and what the microphone measures. No difference. However, there was something that bothered us a little bit, and that was that the preparation, contrary to other preparations, was very unstable, and we had to adjust all the time. Then, somewhat later, or I should say, to get reflections from using a laser micrometer, we send out a laser beam and we measure the return. And to increase that, we put a small glass sphere on top of the umbu, of the eardrum. And I was going to place such a sphere on the umbu, and clumsy me, I pricked the ear and opened the tympanic membrane. And then I got a shock, because I was of course looking at the microscope. It was as if the tympanic membrane came up into my face. So what the heck is going on? Now imagine something that you can relate to. You are flying into Cape Town, and you're not really paying attention, but suddenly you realize that, oh, this damned background noise from the engines is in the road. But if you then start chewing down or something, or do something like this, you open your static canal, and suddenly you hear it all again. And this is exactly what happens to these anesthetized birds. Because the pharyngo-tympanic canal comes from each ear, it comes to the upper part of the mouth, and there is a valve, a muscular control valve, and it stops working when they are anesthetized. So blood flowing through the, or against the middle ear cavity will take away different gases. And when they take away different gases, the pressure decreases very much. Exactly the same as if you fly into Cape Town and the pressure from outside increases. So you lose all the low frequency hearing. So that's why we didn't see any effect. But once we punctured the eardrum, we had all the effects. So there was a number of studies that had to be discarded.
Would you say that's the same with the diving birds as well, the cormorants?
Exactly.
Is it the same?
And by the way, that's we had some colleagues in Germany to study penguins, and they made micro CT scans of penguin skulls, and they maintain that penguins do not have such a in order.
So they don't equalize with it.
So they don't equalize, but then they have other needs. But again, as I said, I started saying, what I've been talking about today is sort of the generic bird. But birds are so incredibly different, both in their anatomy and in their physiology and in their behavior. For instance, the barn owl that we have mentioned a couple of times, and which Catherine will come into much more, instead of having a basilar papilla of say 5 millimeters, its basilar papilla is about 11 millimeters. And instead of having different frequencies all the way, a very large chunk of it is only for the frequencies it used when it comes. So there's very much possibility, very much parallel processing that will further increase the precision of its localization abilities. Is that understandable?
I have a technical problem. Anybody?
Well, it really depends what you are interested in. Of course, I mean, the classic studies have been with territory owners.
That's a big
where the bird was sitting in its territory, and then it will react
So it
to
should be the black.
intruders. And since it's often up
So what did you do? You had it
canopy or
Just
there's
wanna
needs
see.
blocking the view, it needs to be rather accurate.
I can't find, there's not a
And,
zoom.
Yeah,
That's
what I was
a
looking
question of
Okay,
how
If you click this
how
gallery, maybe.
good is it
this
to
one.
get into the right position to chase away the intruder.
I simply can't get it. There should
I'm
be
saying
something to get
so
back.
far,
Close
I don't see any obvious application for it. It's
yeah,
natural
yeah.
to understand
No, that's a way to do it.
just one
Okay,
aspect
thank you.
of their perception of
Okay,
the
so
world. Because they use all senses, of course, and it is a problem when we concentrate on this.
Could you not build on that argument and say that we need to learn the natural history of how these systems are and self-propagation, and then for things that are when we're building wind farms, for example, and if these big structures that are going to be in their way, then there's going to change that whole structure and system.
That's absolutely wrong.
Also injures as well. If you think on putting acoustic deterrents to avoid sharks, for example, for shark nets, you might know what's the directionality of the sun receptor for the sharks, or where you're going to, which kind of material you're going to use, which kind of where you're going to put on the net. You are going to use a net or not.
Yeah, no, definitely, because I was actually speaking to Jacob a little bit earlier about exactly that, using the orcas acoustics to deter sharks in areas like Australia or KZN, where they have like shark problems and they have shark nets. If we can't use sound itself to kind of deter or use it for data protection type of thing. So yeah, that's where.
Well, pingers, of course, are used quite a lot to base at nets, such that you scare away when you have a stationary fishing net to scare away seals, for instance, or hawks, or dolphins.
Yeah, or exactly like animals that you don't want to catch, which is bycatch type. Yes, of course.
So it's, I mean, elucidating this may give you some indication of how you could interfere, so
Yeah.
they want to work optimally.
Okay, I think